I never imagined the day would come when I'd walk into our family business and feel the air thick with silence heavier than any machine noise. The familiar scent of stale coffee and old paper that once comforted me was now suffocating. The lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that danced like ghosts of better days. This place, once buzzing with energy and laughter, now felt like a tomb for dreams. Dad sat behind the cracked counter, his eyes hollow, tracing the same lines on a ledger that refused to add up. Mom hovered near the doorway, her hands trembling as she folded and unfolded a letter with no new hope inside. The tension filled every corner of the room, making it impossible to breathe without hearing the unspoken fears clawing at our hearts. I tried to break the silence with a joke, something light to remind us all we were still a family, but it fell flat. The words hung awkwardly, swallowed by the thick weight of what was happening outside this storefront. The business, our legacy, was on the edge of collapse, and none of us knew how to stop the fall. Mom's voice cracked as she finally spoke, revealing a letter from the bank. The final notice. The mortgage was overdue by months, and the threat of foreclosure loomed closer than ever. Her hands shook so violently I could barely hold the paper steady enough to read the words myself. It felt like the ground beneath us was giving way. Dad's face tightened, his jaw clenched in a way that told me he was holding back a storm inside. I'd never seen him like that, pride and desperation tangled in a way that made him seem smaller, more fragile. He told us he was trying everything, talking to suppliers, hustling for new customers, but the truth was clear: we were drowning. My older brother, Mark, stormed in then, his usual calm replaced by frustration. He slammed a folder of unpaid bills onto the counter, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He blamed Dad for being stuck in old ways, for refusing to adapt, for not listening to the new ideas that might save us. The argument quickly spiraled, voices rising and tearing at years of love and respect. I stayed quiet, caught in the middle of a war I didn't know how to fight. Mark's words cut deep, but I understood his anger. The business wasn't just Dad's anymore, it was ours too, and it was slipping away like sand through our fingers despite all our efforts. Mom tried to intervene, her voice barely above a whisper, pleading for calm. But the cracks in our family were widening with every heated word. The room felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow, memories of better times fading into the background noise of desperation. I remember looking out the window and seeing the street empty, the usual foot traffic replaced by silence. The neighborhood had changed, and so had the world around us. Online shopping, big chains, and economic shifts had slowly choked the life out of our little shop, and no amount of stubborn hope could bring it back. That night I lay awake listening to the muffled sounds of my parents arguing behind closed doors. I wondered how we ended up here, how the dream Dad started with his own hands was now a burden none of us felt strong enough to carry anymore. The weight of failure pressed down so hard I couldn't breathe. Days blurred into one another as we tried to patch together solutions. Mark suggested selling off parts of the inventory, even downsizing staff, but the thought of laying off employees who had become like family cut deeper than the debts. Mom tried reaching out to old customers, but many had moved on or couldn't afford to come back. I volunteered to help more, even though I was still in school, juggling homework and part-time jobs. I cleaned, organized, and answered phones with a fake cheerfulness that cracked every time I hung up. The fear of losing everything was a constant shadow, but I clung to the hope that if I worked hard enough, I could keep us afloat. One afternoon, a stranger came into the shop, a potential investor Dad had met through a business contact. He spoke in calm, measured tones about turning the company around, injecting capital and modernizing operations. For the first time in weeks, Dad's eyes flickered with something like hope, but the cost was unclear and the risks felt enormous. The family meeting that followed was tense. Mark was skeptical, warning us not to trust outsiders who might take control away from us. Mom was torn between desperation and fear of losing the family business's soul. I felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread, unsure if this was salvation or the beginning of the end. After the meeting, I caught Dad alone in the back room, staring at old photographs of the business's early days. He confessed how scared he was, not just for the business, but for what losing it would mean for us all. His voice broke, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the strong facade, vulnerable and uncertain. The days that followed were a whirlwind of phone calls, paperwork, and whispered conversations. The investor's offer was real, but it came with strings attached, major changes, new leadership, and the possibility of losing control. It felt like choosing between survival and identity, between the future and the past. Mark argued fiercely against the deal, saying we should fight harder, find new ways ourselves. Mom pleaded for unity, reminding us that the business was more than profits, it was our family's story. I felt caught in the middle, desperate to find a way to hold us together, but the cracks seemed too wide. One night I overheard a heated argument between Dad and Mark that ended with slammed doors and harsh words. Mark accused Dad of giving up too easily, of betraying the family's hard work. Dad accused Mark of being reckless and selfish. Their voices echoed down the empty hallways, breaking my heart. I spent hours wandering through the empty store, touching the worn shelves, the faded signs, the tools and products that had once symbolized hope and hard work. The silence was deafening, and I felt like a stranger in a place that used to be home. The future was slipping away faster than any of us could stop. Then came the news that shook us all. A major creditor was demanding immediate payment or legal action. Panic set in, and the fragile truce between family members shattered. We scrambled to find money, selling personal belongings and borrowing from friends, but it was never enough. The walls were closing in. I remember the day the power was cut off because of unpaid bills. The fluorescent lights flickered and died, leaving us in darkness. The cold crept in, and the store felt abandoned, a shell of what it once was. We sat together in silence, the weight of our failure pressing down on each of us. With no electricity and dwindling hope, the investor's offer seemed like the only lifeline left. We gathered around the kitchen table, the tension palpable as Dad read the contract aloud. Every clause felt like a betrayal, but without this, the business would close for good. Tears streamed down Mom's face as she whispered prayers for a miracle. I looked at my family, Dad, Mom, Mark, and saw the exhaustion etched deep into their faces. The business wasn't just a job or a building, it was their identity, their pride, and their burden. The decision we faced wasn't just financial, it was about what kind of future we wanted and what we were willing to sacrifice. Late that night, I sat alone in the darkened store, holding an old family photo. I traced the smiles frozen in time, wondering if we could ever find our way back to those days. The silence was broken by the distant sound of a storm rolling in, mirroring the turmoil inside me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear: everything was about to change. The morning broke with a cold wind and a sense of inevitability. We sat down again, this time with a fragile resolve to face whatever came next together. The business we loved was crumbling, but maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to rebuild from the ashes if we could find the strength to forgive, to fight, and to hope. But as the sun rose, so did the questions. Could we survive this storm without losing each other? Could a family torn apart by fear and pride find a way back to unity? The answers were uncertain, and the road ahead was shrouded in shadows. All I knew was that the fight wasn't over yet. Every day brought a new challenge, a call from creditors, a broken machine, a bitter argument. The business was bleeding, and so were we. Yet beneath the exhaustion and heartbreak, a stubborn ember of hope flickered. It was fragile, but it was there, waiting for a chance to ignite once more. I found myself learning things about my family I never knew, how much they were hurting, how deeply they cared, and how afraid they were of losing not just the business, but each other. It made me want to fight harder, to be the glue that kept the pieces from falling apart entirely. Our story was no longer just about profits or products. It was about survival, about love tested by hardship, about a family standing at the edge and deciding whether to leap into the unknown together or fall apart alone. The future was uncertain, but the past was a powerful reminder of what we were fighting for. And so, each morning I returned to that creaky counter, to the worn shelves and the flickering lights. I greeted the quiet, the tension, the waiting, because beneath it all was a story still being written, one of struggle, resilience, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could save what mattered most. Sometimes, when the weight feels unbearable, I remind myself that every family has battles we don't see. Ours is just a little louder, a little messier, and a little more painful. But it's ours, and no matter how dark the days become, the door to our family business remains open, a testament to the fight we're all still willing to give. I don't know how this ends. Maybe the door's close for good, and the story fades into a memory. Or maybe we find a way through the storm, stronger and more united than ever. Either way, I'm here, caught in the middle of it all, holding on to the pieces of a dream that refuses to die quietly. The nights are still long and filled with doubt, and the days are heavy with hard decisions. But in the quiet moments, when no one else is watching, I catch glimpses of that old spark, the laughter, the passion, the love that built this business from nothing. It reminds me why we fight and why giving up is not an option yet. So here I am, a kid in the middle of a family business on the verge of collapse, trying to keep the lights on, the doors open, and the hope alive. The future is uncertain, but as long as we breathe, there's a chance. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. The story continues, tangled and raw, full of moments too painful to forget and too precious to lose. And as we face tomorrow, I hold on to the fragile belief that even in the darkest times, family can be the light that guides us back home. This is just the beginning of a chapter none of us wanted to write, but it's ours. And no matter what happens next, we'll face it together, one breath, one step, one fragile hope at a time. The clock ticks, the bills stack, and the arguments flare, but beneath it all is the quiet pulse of a family trying not to break. And maybe that's enough to keep us going, even when everything feels like it might fall apart. Because sometimes, holding on is the bravest thing you can do. And sometimes, the hardest battles are fought not in the boardroom or on spreadsheets, but inside the hearts of the people who refuse to give up on each other. So I sit here, in the fading light of our family business, listening to the storm outside and the storm inside. And I wonder, how do you save something that means everything when it feels like everything is slipping away? The answer isn't clear, but the fight is real, and as long as we're still here, breathing and hoping, the story isn't over. Not yet.